Loneliness is not just something that happens to us because we are human. It's actually something that can happen to us if we don't have the kind of nurturing connection, attachment, and love that we deserve as babies and children in the world. Without that connection, that emotional attachment to a parent that is healthy, we go through this process of loneliness. And we become, whether we realize it or not as a child, we become psychologically and emotionally lonely. And if you suffer that over many days, over many years of your development, and one day you hit 20, or age 25, age 30, and you recognize that, wait a minute, there's this emptiness within me, inside of me, that is making my life way more difficult because I don't know if I'm loved, if I'm lovable, if anybody is even willing to come and kind of satisfy this void of loneliness. Once you become an adult, you start recognizing these things about yourself, and you may find yourself struggling with two very common types of loneliness, and that's developmental or existential. Now, developmental loneliness says this: it's I am developmentally either more mature or less mature than my actual peer group. I'm also different in age, different in mentality, different in just kind of the way that I see the world all around me. And that can make you feel really developmentally out of place, right? This happens a lot to kids who are on the autism spectrum or kids who are just far advanced in a lot of different ways. So you can go through that. You can also struggle with existential loneliness, which is this deep feeling of what is life? Why am I here? What am I supposed to do now that I'm here? Why did God give me a parent like this? Why am I experiencing this loneliness and this pain? And so this kind of deep existential loneliness can then transform into the 7 most common forms of loneliness. We're going to get into that in this video. If you grow up in a household with an emotionally detached or immature parent, it's very likely that you're going to struggle with not only your identity, but loneliness. If you live a parasitic lifestyle with a parent who's constantly relying on other people for stamina, support, motivation, money, basic needs, then you most likely have been around a lot of people. You've probably stayed with family members as a child or as an adolescent, and maybe that parent just kind of left you feeling all alone. What do you do at that point, right? But try to fill that loneliness void. And that can sometimes lead to a lot of trouble. Psychology research that looks at the psychology of loneliness suggests that there are 7 common types of loneliness that can really just engulf you. The first is emotional, where you're very unsatisfied with the relationships that you are among. You don't feel that interconnection. There's also situational loneliness, right? It's kind of like being in the same relationship or situation with someone and feeling so very all alone. Dealing with grief and loss, being at a funeral home, and just kind of, you're in a situation with other people, but you're just kind of in this mindset of, I'm all alone in this pain. I'm all alone in this walk. The other kind of loneliness is platonic. Now, that's the kind of loneliness where you look around and you say, wait a minute, I'm not married. I'm not in a relationship. That one's expecting a baby. That one's going that place. Where do I get in? And so you can kind of feel this platonic loneliness, especially if you have, for example, a spouse who has a really close family and you're constantly with his family or constantly with her family. That can make you feel really alone. There's the I'm different loneliness, where maybe you have a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder, or maybe you have a diagnosis that kind of sets you apart. Of course, we talked about briefly the existential loneliness and also the internal loneliness, that feeling of, I just feel so lonely on the inside. I'm around so many people every day, and yet I go home and I'm still alone. I used to say to my mom all the time that we are ultimately alone. And that's an existential concept a lot of people do not want to hear, right? Even if we are in a room full of people, we have to sit with our thoughts. We have to sit with our own heart. We have to sit with our own mind. And that in and of itself is a place of loneliness. If you feel like you've experienced this kind of loneliness, the psychology of the lonely child, adolescent, or adult child, you want to keep watching. It's really important to understand that there are a lot of things that happens in the relationship between an emotionally detached parent or an emotionally immature parent and their child. You're an adult child and you still have expectations for your parent. But if you've grown up in a household where attachment was never really fostered in a healthy way, where you were kind of left to your own devices, maybe the parent didn't seem interested in your life and your world and your needs, then it's very, very possible that you have kind of like this inborn, it can feel like an inborn or deep-seated loneliness that's really hard to shake no matter what you do. So one of the causes, according to research, of internal and emotional loneliness is having an emotionally detached parent or immature parent. The other part, low emotional intelligence. You know, you may have a parent who has low emotional intelligence can very much leave you in a state of loneliness, right? Because they don't necessarily lead with empathy. They may understand what it is that you need, but they may not be able to fully understand. Walking on eggshells within your family can also cause a state of loneliness. Maybe you had a sibling that had a problem. Maybe your parent was constantly moody and irritable and had anger management issues. So you have to walk on eggshells, and that can leave you ultimately feeling alone. There's also withholding of affection. Right? Some parents just don't want you to touch them, and that can make you feel lonely. There also may be a discrepancy in your mind between what you need your parent to be and what they aren't. Let me go back over that. You may find that there's a discrepancy in what your parent is versus what you need. And so when there's a discrepancy there, that is exactly where loneliness can take root, and it can make you feel lonely for a very, very long time. Some of the challenges that you may face, and we're going to talk about this more in my live chat, so check that out pretty soon. You can find yourself experiencing a lot of shame, blame, and doubt. There may also be an existential crisis and an existential feeling of discomfort, right? It's hard to really feel okay. It's hard to really, feel loved and secured and grounded, right? There may also be some weekend loneliness, we call it sometimes. The weekend is the hardest part for you, that it's really hard sometimes to feel connected. Fluid boundaries can also leave you feeling alone, not really knowing how to tell people no, right? There's this people-pleasing thing happening with you on the inside. There may be times when you feel kind of this, interpersonal loss of autonomy. You can't really be independent and autonomous, right? Because the relationship that you've held with a parent like this has really made you very dependent. Stay tuned with me as we continue on in this conversation. I'll see you Friday live, Friday and Saturday. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.